Hi guys, so in this video we'll be discussing terms of trade, which is part of international trade as a whole. So the first point which we'll be going over is, well, countries can't produce everything, which is well, obviously they can't produce everything. That's a well-known fact. But we'll discuss this in more detail. So let's have a look. Let's say we have the UAE, and the UAE is, well, an oil-rich country, and so they can produce oil, right? As compared to a country like Pakistan, we don't have oil, we don't have oil reserves, and so we can't really produce oil, which is why we take oil from the UAE and we give them something back in return. Let's say we give them carpets. That's what we do. We give them carpets in return, right? And so there is a ratio between oil and carpet. For example, let's say if the ratio was 1 to the ratio 5, then that means for 5 carpets, for 5 units of carpets, 5 units of carpet, we'll get 1 unit of barrel of oil, or 1 barrel of oil. 1 unit of oil in terms of barrels. So this ratio between goods, for example, it's the ratio of exchange of goods themselves, because we are, well, exchanging carpets and oil in this case, both of which are goods, and there is a ratio which we utilize to, well, exchange the good itself. In this case, we have 5 units of carpet will get us 1 barrel of oil, or 1 barrel of oil can get us, well, 5 units of carpet. And so this is the part which comes in. Since we can't produce everything, countries produce goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage. We'll go more in detail within this concept later on. So countries produce goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage, and so it's safe to assume that the UAE has a comparative advantage in oil, and Pakistan has a comparative advantage in, well, carpets, because it's uh, the opportunity cost. We'll discuss this in more detail, but the basic is that we as Pakistan, we have a lower opportunity cost in the production of carpets, and the UAE has a lower opportunity cost in the production of oil, and so they produce oil and we produce carpets, and it's not the other way around. This is why international trade leads to specialization, as we already know, and the specialization basically means, well, going all in terms of poker. It's basically going all in. It's prioritizing certain goods and services in which are comparative advantage. This is a concept we'll go more in detail later on. So if we have, let's say, if the UAE has more competitive advantage in in the production of oil, right? The UAE has a competitive advantage in the production of oil, so the UAE will specialize in this industry. Specialize. They will spend most of the resources, or a lot of the resources, on, well, producing oil rather than making carpets or anything like that. So this is why countries specialize. They go all in. They prioritize the production of certain goods and services, and they specialize in those goods and services because they can't produce everything, and they only produce goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage. So let's move on to comparative advantage then. So now let's have a look at comparative advantage. So in this case, we will also have to, like, really go into what absolute advantage is. So let's have a look at this example and try to understand what absolute advantage is in this case. So in this case, country A can produce 100 units of wheat or 300 units of cloth, right? And country B can produce 40 units of wheat or 240 units of cloth, given their resources. Obviously, we have limited resources in an economy, and so given the amount of resources in their economies, in their respective economies, they can produce these quantities. So in this case, we can see, well, A can produce more wheat as compared to B, right? B can only produce 40, A can produce, well, 100. And so A can produce more, so it has an absolute advantage in the production of wheat. Let's have a look at cloth. In cloth, B can produce 240 and A can produce 300. Since A can produce more cloth, it has an absolute advantage in the production of cloth. But this is not the whole story. We are here to really understand what comparative advantage is, right? This part makes sense. Okay, A has an absolute advantage in both the production of cloth and the production of wheat. But international trade depends on comparative advantage rather than absolute advantage. And so we'll have a look at that. So in this case, we can see, well, this is 1 to the ratio 3. And this is 1 to the ratio 6. Now, how did I get this ratio? Well, if you were to divide 100 with 300 in this way, when moving from 100 to 300 in this way, you would end up with this. This is just basic maths, and so we will end up with 1 to the ratio 3. On the other hand, if you were to use or go across country B like this, then it's going to be something like this. It's going to be 40 over 240, which will give us 1 to the ratio of 6. So in this case, we can see that if country A wants to produce 1 unit of wheat, it has to give up 3 units of cloth, right? Because the ratio is 1 to the ratio 3. Country A can either produce 100 units of wheat or it can produce 300 units of cloth. And so if it wants to produce, let's say, 1 unit of wheat, it will give up 3 units of cloth. Now let's have a look at country B. If country B wants to produce 1 unit of wheat, it will have to give up 6 units of cloth, 6. So since we know, well, obviously 6 is a larger number as compared to 3, and so country A has to give up less. Country A has to give up less to produce 1 unit of wheat. Country A has a comparative advantage in the production of wheat. Let's just erase this part. So country A has a comparative advantage. A has comparative advantage in production of wheat. Advantage in wheat. Let's have a look at B. So for 3 units of cloth given up, in country A we end up with 1 unit of wheat. Or in country, now let's have a look at this. In the other way, what we can also say is, well, if country A gives up 1 unit of wheat, it can produce 3 units of cloth, right? Let's look at country B. If country B gives up 1 unit of wheat, that's 1 unit, it can produce 6 units of cloth. And so it's giving up less to produce more. So just like A has a comparative advantage in the production of wheat, B also has a comparative advantage, but now in this case, in the production of cloth, has comparative advantage in cloth. So this is how we explain comparative advantage. But the question arises, why are we really doing comparative advantage? How does it relate to, well, terms of trade? So the thing is, when countries do trade, we discussed how terms of trade is kind of the rate of exchange for goods and services. So we were giving, in this case, 1 unit of oil in terms of 5 units of carpets, right? Or 5 units of carpet in terms of 1 unit of oil. So in this case, countries set their terms of trade or the rate of exchange in between the two ratios of opportunity cost. So over here we have this and we have this. So these are the two ratios of opportunity cost. We have 1 over 3 and we have 1 over 6. And we do know, well, country A has a comparative advantage in the production of wheat, country B has a comparative advantage in the production of cloth. So this has been proven. So now when setting the rate of exchange between two goods, wheat and cloth in this case, let's just say it's wheat and cloth, the governments of both the countries, of country A and B, they will choose a ratio, they will use a ratio between these two ratios, 1 over 3 and then 1 over 6. So let's say we take 1 over 5. So this will then become the rate of exchange. Then in this case, for 1 unit of wheat will get us 5 units of cloth. Because we do know, well, country A has a comparative advantage in the production of wheat, and so country A will produce wheat. Since we already discussed, well, when countries have a comparative advantage in something, they specialize in the production of that thing and then they produce the good. So country A has a competitive advantage in the production of wheat, and so country A will produce wheat. Country B has a competitive advantage in the production of cloth, and so country B will produce cloth. So in this case, we will have to give up 1 unit of wheat, like country A will have to give up 1 unit of wheat to get 5 units of cloth from B. And just like that, country B will have to give up 5 units of cloth to get or to receive 1 unit of wheat from country A. So this ratio, which lies in between the two domestic opportunity cost ratios, because these are within those countries and within a country means domestic. And so these two ratios, these two opportunity cost or these two domestic opportunity cost ratios, well, they give us a value in between themselves, which is 1/5, which is the rate of exchange between the two goods, also known as terms of trade.